Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Corey Empowers Mental Wealth Wednesday. And we are here the last Wednesday of December, December 27th, 2023. And we have a very special guest today, Dr. Michele Fletcher. And while Michele and I are both from the same hometown, we have never met each other personally, but we have had the opportunity to talk, to share, and to just lift each other up in the work that we're continuing to do from our own lived experience and now in our professional lives and careers. So today we have Dr. Michele Fletcher. She is a wonderful woman who is doing wonderful things in terms of helping people who are living with severe mental illness, and specifically those who are diagnosed with mental illness and developmental disabilities. Michele has had the opportunity to serve in the Marine Corp right after high school, and also having her own consulting company called the Fletcher Consulting Group. Is that what it is, Michele? Services. Fletcher
Yes.
Consulting Services. And Michele has earned a doctorate. She has earned a master's. She is a highly acclaimed woman, very successful. And she is using her career, using her personal interests to help the lives of other people. Michele, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I'm looking forward to this great conversation with you and ultimately to be able to share some great strategies, tips, and just personal experience with those who are joining us today. So, how are
Thank you
you?
so much. Yeah, good. Thank you so much for having me. I look forward to speaking with your uh, base of your audience base, as well as you and others that may be coping with individuals who have, mental health issues.
Yes, it is very important. I truly, truly appreciate like the days and the months and the weeks that we have that are designated to acknowledge different aspects of mental health and wellness. But as I tend to say all the time, mental illness is a 365 global issue, and we should continue to talk about it all the time, share resources, and just help each other understand and know how to navigate through the mental health care system, as well as in our careers for those who are acting as caregivers while they're building their careers, and ultimately for the actual person who is living with the symptoms. So, Michele, I talked about you having these different degrees that you've earned. It takes a while to earn degrees, and I just want to know, what led you to the degrees in which you earned?
I've always been a humanitarian, so it was easy for me to transition into learning about how to best support people who have disabilities or mental health issues. So for me, it was a natural transition. Hey, this is what I love doing. It comes naturally. So let me learn how to be the best I can be within that field. So.
Well, tell us a little bit about your consulting services. Where are you located, and how do people learn about the work that you do and the services that may be beneficial to their families?
Well, I'm located in Georgia and I've been here for about 27 years. And we originally started after school supports for students with disabilities. And then we branched into supporting adults and youth with developmental disabilities and mental health issues in the community. So we provided residential services for them as well as employment services for them. Um, and of course, my main reason and probably the main cause of me getting into the work that I do is because both my mother and my sister that has passed both have paranoid schizophrenia. So
Mm.
it's what I've been around my whole life. So it was just a natural transition for me to figure out how can I support them best, figure out how to help them, and how can I cope with all of the things that come with being a sister or a daughter of someone who has, mental health issues.
Wow, that sounds like a really heavy load. And for you to be able to transition that into something positive and ultimately helping others, I just truly commend you on that. And just knowing from lived experience, but also through research and just our conversation, having this in your life and then going into work in your professional career with the same type of subject matter. What has been the greatest challenge for you?
I think initially, because I was so young when I first realized it, is just accepting that this is your reality
Mm,
and you have to decide whether you're going to let it break you or you're going to rise above and figure out how to best cope and support those, cope
mhm,
dealing with the issues. Because it's when you're young, it's like very traumatic. So you're like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? It's the shame, the embarrassment, the fear, the anxiety of just not knowing what to expect and then going, okay, I got it. Now how can I cope with this? What can I do to help?
mhm. And so what is that? What did you ultimately learn that you could do for yourself as well as helping other people? Like how did you navigate this uncharted territory of having such intimately close family members, a mother and a sister who have severe brain disorders and very significant and challenging symptoms related to those disorders? How did you learn to navigate, and what did you do to navigate?
I have 8 siblings, so my mom had 8 kids, so it's 8 of us, and so that helped having other people to
Mm,
help, brainstorm off of and go, what are we going to do? How does this going to be? But I think the other part of that helped a lot was reaching out to support groups, agencies like NAMI, just saying, hey, I don't think I'm going to make it. Can you
mhm.
provide me with some type of support so I can feel like I can make it to the next day or I can help, things like that. So that was a big factor.
Okay. So NAMI, you would say the National Alliance on Mental Illness. For those who have not heard of NAMI, that's the acronym for the National Association on Mental Illness. And you can go to NAMI.org, NAMI.org, to learn more. But when did you first hear about NAMI? And when you heard about it, what did you do? How did you know it was related to what you were experiencing in your home?
Well, I think, just different agencies that was reaching out because my situation at home was very traumatic. It was always some type of agency involved, whether it was DFACS or it was the police or it was the
Mm,
hospitals, where my mom was being treated. It was always somebody going, are you guys okay? Can we help? Can we help? And they would give us information on different agencies that could help and support. So I think I was one of the ones who was like, I'm going to try to figure out, what I can do. I think all of us internalized and cope with it differently.
right.
Some people turn to other things to help them cope. I'm not a person that really can use substances or something outside of myself to cope. So
Mhm.
I had to figure out, need to get help. You need to start reading. You need to start reaching out. And so I think that helped a lot. I mean, I think a lot of 12-step programs help people in general that have issues, whether it's with addiction or with just dealing with something that's debilitating.
Mhm. Well, that's very good, and just understanding the importance of reading and researching to learn something about this diagnosis. Like you hear this phrase and paranoid schizophrenia or whatever the diagnosis is, but you may not understand, know what it will entail, and likely for a lifetime, not like a temporary
Yeah.
situation, but for a chronic lifetime illness. And it can be very challenging. But at the same time, it seems that you found some blessings, some positive, some resourcefulness through navigating the uncharted territory of learning about severe mental illness. What have you found to be some of the hidden blessings in all of the things you've experienced?
I definitely know I wouldn't be who I am today if I hadn't had the type of childhood I had. I don't know if I would be as serving, as giving, as wanting to support, and as compassionate as I am.
Mm,
When I was going through school, I know one of the things that really stood with me is the stages of grief.
mm,
And so, because you go through periods of like you're angry, or you're like, I'm not dealing with this anymore, or you're just frustrated, and then you're mad. And it's like you go up and down that spectrum of grief. And I think, just recognizing that, okay, it's okay. People have went through this. You're going to be okay. Let's look at the good of this. And so I find myself looking at positive things versus the negative a lot
Mhm.
more. And I think when you're going through a storm, you sometimes only see that havoc and chaos. But when you make it to the other side of this crisis, you're like, I made it. I need to give myself a badge here. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
Now it's very interesting, and you can be introspective or retrospective and looking back, and as they say, 2020 hindsight.
Mhm.
So when you were a child, because this started early for you,
Very early.
when you were a child, what were your initial thoughts? How did you know what to do? I understand there were agencies involved, but first of all, how old were you when it was either your mother or your sister that was first diagnosed? And then as a child, what was your understanding versus how you grew to understand more and now working in the same line of subject matter in your career?
As a child, it was just mostly fear. And
Mm-hmm.
then my grandmother was there, my mom's mom. She was always, kind of smoothing things over and taking care of things. And I think she protected us a lot because there was a lot of fear, and there was a lot of shame, and there was a lot of, stigma, a
Mm-hmm.
lot of stigma. And so I think initially as a child, it was more just trying to cope with those emotions, and having my aunts and uncles and cousins there helped a lot. But I think as I got older, particularly after my grandmother passed, then I had to really figure out, what are you going to do? Grandma's not
Mm-hmm.
here now, so
Mm-hmm.
this is your mom, it's your responsibility. So I think just having that sense of responsibility, that love, and I think one thing this has taught me is that unconditional love is real. You really have to love someone and be willing to go all the miles that it's going to take and still take, to stay in there. Because a lot of people, even siblings handle it differently. Some may be like, I'm not dealing with that. I don't
Mm-hmm.
care. And then you'll have other ones that's just like, she's sick. I understand it. So it's just, it really depends on the person and their capacity to be forgiving and forgive yourself, and then give yourself grace too. I think a lot of people don't give themselves grace. You're going to be mad. You're going to have days you don't want to deal with it. It's
Right.
natural.
Right. Wow. And it's interesting that you talked about grief, and that's what took me to the child version of you and where you realized that you were experiencing grief. Maybe grief of maybe a mother you never knew, and maybe the images that we see on television. Just on Christmas, my friend and I did a pop-up Christmas mental wealth check-in, and we talked about grief in some cases, and how a lot of what we internalize is based on commercials and societal views and norms, gender roles and norms, but it's not our own interpretation of who we are or who a loved one is supposed to be in our lives. It's really based on, at least for me, and I talk about it in my book, based on the things I saw on TV, like Leave It to Beaver and Gidget. But
Definitely
seriously,
not
people
that.
internalize those images, right?
Yeah.
Uh, of what they see, the Hallmark card you're supposed to give them at certain times of the year, made up holidays like Sweetest Day. But who said? But ultimately, with the grief, how you learn what that emotion is, what those stages are, and was it during your childhood or later in life? And
It
you
was
gave us
definitely
some
later
words
in
to go
life.
with?
I didn't know what I was experiencing as a child. And to be really frank, I didn't realize either until I was much older that I was operating from a baseline of
Mm,
sadness, depression, grief myself. I thought
mm,
that was norm.
mhm,
So when I did feel feelings of happiness, or and I was like, this is different.
mhm,
um, because you do experience that grief of not having that mom, grief of not having that sibling, grief of not ever being able, you see kids that have that and you're like, oh, I want that.
Mm-hmm.
But you're not going to have that. You may never get that also. And I think the realization of that what if I never get that? What if I never have that type of parent I can come home to or confide in or leave your kids with, or any of the stuff that other people get to do, you take for granted. And I tell my friends that I'll see people who take their mom for granted. I'm like, you should be really happy, because there are people who don't have that, or instead of being a child, you're the caretaker,
Right.
and so not ever having that, I think, puts you in a weird position, but I think it also builds your character, because
Yes.
I just didn't have that, and then realizing I didn't have it was real strange.
Yeah, I truly appreciate that. I feel like I first fully learned and understood grief and the stages of grief by going through a course based on a book, the Grief Recovery Handbook. And they say that, the reason, whatever experience that you had that led you to go into the grief recovery course, won't be the only thing that you learn or address during that course. Like other things come out during that course. And the things that you learn, the strategies that you learn to implement in your life can help you with all of those things, because you can see that that current experience is probably based off of um, what led you to be who you are, the
Mhm.
experiences you had as a child, and how now that you're going through this course and learning the things that it teaches you, how you can apply it to your life to help you through all of that, even going back into childhood. But most recently, I participated in a webinar that NAMI did, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and it was about a different form of grief. At this very moment, I cannot remember the phrase, but I want to touch on this because it's for those, like you said, be grateful for the parents that you have, whoever that loved one may be. They may get on your nerves or you're frustrated or whatever, but grateful that you have that person. In the case of those who have a loved one here still living on earth, but you grieve who they are no longer, or what you never had in the role that they were supposed to fill in your life,
Mhm.
i.e., a mother, right? But if you never really had, again, these images that we see on TV as your mother, you may grieve that. There's some type of loss that you feel, whether it's the lack of love, affection, or whatever may come from this person's illness that doesn't allow you to have that. So I just wanted to bring that up because those feelings are real. And
Mhm.
in your line of work, I imagine it would be important for you to be able to communicate that to families. You help families that have a loved one dually diagnosed with mental illness and developmental disabilities. What would you say, to this family that is having a difficult time understanding this life that they want to love and that they want to continue to be a part of, but just are overwhelmed with the feelings that they don't know what to do with?
I mean, like I said, for me, I had to start looking at the glass half full, half instead of half empty. I think a lot of people, it's easy to get it's easy to get wrapped up in that feeling of what you didn't have or what you will never have. But then you have to count the blessings of what you will have and what you
Mm,
do currently have. And as I said, I know with 100% certainly I wouldn't be who I am today if I hadn't went through what I went through as a child and as an adult. And I also understand that, you know, God never puts more on you than what you can handle. And I realized that as a person, that everything that I went through has helped build me to who I am now. And the stuff I
mm,
thought I'd never get through, I've gotten through.
mhm,
And I can say up until probably the last 4 or 5 years, I didn't have any any type of image of a mother before. It was just, dealing with a crisis, a crisis, a crisis, a crisis, a crisis. And so I'm very thankful and blessed for the time that I do have, whatever
mm,
that time is. If it's 5 seconds, I'm grateful for it. And I know that probably sounds strange for people, but for me, time is the one thing you can't get back,
Mm.
one thing you can't change. So you have to be grateful for whatever time you do get, because that, it is what it is.
That's a good way to put it, and it can also be very complicated to get to that point, right? Of it is what it is, or this is what I'm dealing with, and I can't change it. We could think about the serenity prayer and try to get through the emotional stress of being a caregiver, or just a loved one who wants to love up on somebody that may not be in a space to receive that love that you want to give to them. So, knowing what you know now and working with different types of families, what things would you do differently? Knowing the barriers that exist for families who are trying to cope with mental illness, and specifically severe mental illness, dealing with psychosis.
Stigma is a real big issue for me. That's a big point for advocacy for me, because so many, so many different agencies and people make you feel bad for, having a mental illness, or make you feel bizarre or different. And it's so many people coping with mental illness in different ways. It doesn't have to be as extreme as schizophrenia. It could just be depression.
Right.
Or anxiety, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. People need to do more, reach out more to people who need that support. I want to say, for me, I went through at least 40 years of not being ever to hug my mom, or to
Mm.
show her that love, or to receive that back. And that's a lot for a child, or even an adult, because you want that. You feel like there's something missing or empty. And so I think taking care of yourself, whatever that is, whether it's a spa day, a girl day, a trip day, hanging out with you need to do something to put and restore yourself, because you are being drained and depleted by support. Giving and being a humanitarian is draining.
Mm.
People just think, oh, she's just so nice, but it drains you. And you
Right.
have to find things to plug you back up, whether that's your friends, whether that's reading, spa, whatever it is, exercise. I found different things that give me back life, that I can get up and see another day.
Hmm.
So I think that's the most important thing I've learned, is I have to regenerate, because, the superpowers go away if you don't regenerate.
And that is very interesting, and it's hard for people to take that time, maybe even give themselves the grace, because we may feel a certain level of guilt for even wanting to take a break, or feeling guilt to because all time is needed, all hands on deck. Many cases, right?
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, different periods of crises, and your I felt at one point like I was operating out of crises, and I didn't know anything else. Even when there wasn't something actually happening, I was on alert, on guard, on standby,
Yes.
ready, because something is about to happen. And that could be a very stressful life to live. So I appreciate you indicating or providing some suggestions on relaxing and taking the time out. But for those people who like truly find it difficult to do that, like they're overwhelmed with guilt and shame, because it's not that there aren't people who want to help them, but they won't allow other people to help for fear or shame, or just wanting to be able to do it all on their own. Are there some more tips that you would give that person that just don't get it right now?
I had a difficult time asking people for help, or even admitting I needed help myself. I thought for so long that's just a sign of weakness. You need to get over it. Especially with the Marine Corps background, you're thinking, get in there, Marine, you can handle it.
Mm.
But I know that all of us have a breaking point, and you can't help anyone if you're not able to stand on your own 2 feet. And so
Mhm.
that's why I'm saying that it doesn't have to be, it could be just going in prayer every night. It could be, something as simple as I read this and it made a difference or an impact. Sometimes I call friends and they provide inspiration or support for me that I didn't think, I needed at the time. And I'm like, wow, I feel so much better now.
Yeah.
I'm very blessed that I have 4 children. And even though some of my kids, put me through the fight or flight mode as well, I'm grateful and blessed to know that I have people that I can turn to, that I can always be myself, and I can say, I don't know how I'm gonna handle this today.
Mhm.
It's too much. But you have to regenerate. There's no other way. Because, like I said, I've had very dark days myself where I felt like, oh my gosh, I can't go on, or this is too much. And I realized that it's because I never recharged.
Mm.
And if you use something all the way up, there's not going to be anything left. So you
Mhm.
have to have someone. It doesn't matter if it's a friend. You can call me Corey, you know that. You need someone you can call and say, hey, this is what I'm going through. What do you think? You have to bounce stuff off of people.
Yeah.
And just know it's no judgment. It's life.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I want to say this also to put it in perspective or maybe to give people a visual, but I often see a post, whether it's on Instagram or even LinkedIn, where it's like a battery, like the chart on our phone, right? And it's showing the battery down to the red, that little tiny slither of red there. And we wouldn't let our phones go all the way out or even get that far down in the red. And we have to think about that for ourselves, allowing our battery, our life, our charge to go down that far. It has to be built back up. You have to allow the time for it. So while you want to use your phone, you got to let it charge. And even while you're letting it charge, you shouldn't use it. So translate that into your life and allowing yourself to recharge. Making sure you're eating, making sure you're drinking enough water, making sure you are simply taking a break. I have known people who rush through using the restroom. That's something that we all have to do through our lives, but it's something that people feel like they don't have time to do. Taking a bath versus a shower, whatever is the quickest thing to do, people are more inclined to do that because they are rushing to try to do other things. And if you are rushing to do other things, not only in your life, but also in taking care of someone else, and you have a career, there would be a point, as Dr. Fletcher has said, where you won't be able to. Another visual that may be helpful for you is thinking of a cup. Dr. Fletcher had mentioned about seeing things with the cup half full. But where is the level of liquid, the level of energy in your cup? Is it low? Because you have to fill up your own cup in order to continue to have anything to fill up someone else's. So please understand that this is not just cliches and phrases that we are saying, but real life practical suggestions to help you to truly have a mentally wealthy life, healthy life. Because whatever or however you're depleted mentally, spiritually, also impacts you physically. We don't hear that people died of stress. We hear that people died of heart attacks or strokes. So, seriously think about and assess your life, your responsibilities, and those for whom you are responsible for, and how can you best manage your time where you are prioritizing your mental and physical health. So,
Okay.
with that, Dr. Fletcher, we talked about some of the barriers and some tips to try to overcome the barriers. Um, you mentioned how you nurture yourself. What's your favorite thing, or what have you found to be the thing that has worked best over the years?
I have to talk things out. I'm a talker, so I have to dial a friend. I guess they call it dial a friend, and kind of talk and work through stuff. And I cry. I
Mm,
think people, oh my gosh, she's crying. If you have to cry, cry. I mean, I really feel like it does wash and cleanse the soul, and you get up and fight to see another day. I am very blessed that Every time I go to sleep, when I wake up, it's a new day. I don't even carry yesterday with me. Whatever today brings, that's what I'm going to tackle today. So I think just knowing your strengths and knowing your weaknesses and knowing that person that complements your weakness, I think that helps you a lot. Because I always
Mhm.
have to find my yang, to my
Mhm.
yin. So I'm like, okay, I have to get with someone who knows what I'm talking about, and they're gonna, give me that life back in me that I need.
Yeah. So, real talk.
Mhm.
If a person is just at the point where they can't do this anymore, but they don't want to just leave their loved one out by him or herself, what are some resources that people should look into in the community or otherwise to be able to fill those gaps that may be left if a person chooses to remove themselves from directly being involved with their loved one's care?
Well, all communities have support groups. Even if they're not advertised, there's hundreds of support groups within all communities. I would definitely start there. As you know, people who we've supported within our group home setting is from families who couldn't do it anymore. And they
Hmm.
decided, hey, I'm going to have to put my loved one into a group home or into a setting where someone else can care for them. I can come and see them, visit and support, but I can't take care of them anymore. It's a danger to myself or it's a danger to others within my home, and that's okay. Um, Everyone's not going to be able to support someone who has a severe mental illness or developmental. It's just not possible. Everyone doesn't have the same capacity. It can turn ugly if you don't have that capacity to do it. And there's nothing worse than you putting yourself in a situation you can't handle.
Mm.
So if it is a situation you can't handle, there are plenty of agencies, there are plenty of support groups that are there to say, hey, let someone else take over. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. It doesn't mean anything other than this is beyond what you can do. And that's okay. We all
Hmm.
have different skill sets. We all have things we're good at and things we're not good at. Because severe mental illness is serious and it has a lot of serious issues that come with it. And everyone's not equipped to deal with those issues. There were
Hmm.
times I wasn't able to. My mom has been in and out of different psychiatric facilities for over 20, 30 years. So, there are times when you're not going to be able to do it. It's going to require professionals to do it.
Hmm. And if this is you, just know that there's also help for you to be able, like Dr. Fletcher says, phone a friend, but to phone a professional who is able to help you to navigate your feelings as well as navigate the system to know what resources may be available specifically in your community so that you can create the best wraparound services, if you will, for your loved one that can fill in the gaps that you can no longer fill or haven't ever been able to fill. Perhaps you live in another state or another city, but you want your loved one to be able to stay in a community in which they are familiar, at least having that, as a positive for them versus relocating them to somewhere they have never been and it may exacerbate their symptoms. So I encourage you to take time for yourself to think about these things. If you're not ready to reach out and actually communicate with someone else, to just think about it, knowing that there are real resources that are available whenever you're ready to tap into these resources. Dr. Fletcher, in being a consultant and helping families, what have some families shared with you as the most helpful part of this journey? And then at the same time, what has been expressed to you as some of the most detrimental or devastating disappointments in this process?
Well, some of the devastating processes was the same ones I went through when I was younger, which is scary that it hasn't changed as much as it should, is police involvement.
Mm.
There are times when the situation becomes threatening for the person that you love as well as other people, and you have to dial 911. And you want someone to come who is familiar with mental illness or familiar with a developmental disability so that no one gets hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of parents have expressed to me that that's been the most difficult part of it, that their loved one has gotten hurt, or they are called and called and the police are tired of them calling, or things of that nature. I think that's been the most challenging. The most gratefulness part is them saying, hey, we're so happy that there are people, organizations out there that understand what we're going through, don't judge us,
Mm-hmm.
and are here to willing to support us, and some of them wish they had acted sooner. I think a lot of them said they didn't because of guilt or shame or fear. And I think just being there and letting them know, hey, we understand and we're here for you is good. But yeah, I would have to say the intervention that occurs when it is a crisis that you have to call support for. And I think it's probably better than when I was a child, but it still has a ways to go.
Mm-hmm. And just with 911, I just also want to remind people that we now have 988 that you can call for mental health crises or substance use crises to get help for your loved one, friend, or someone in the community. But if you happen to call 911, that you ask for a crisis intervention team trained officer, CIT, crisis intervention training. And that officer that comes out is a part of that team, the CIT team. So if you call 911, make sure you ask for someone who has training in crisis intervention. But remember that you can directly call 988, which connects you to local resources in the area in which you call. So I say that because the distinction has been told to me to make sure this is clear. Is like, for example, Dr. Fletcher, you're in Atlanta, I'm in DC. I would not be able to call 988 for services to help Dr. Fletcher because they wouldn't know those. It's connected in your local area. So in Atlanta, when you call 988, it is for resources that are in Atlanta versus calling here in DC. Can't call for another jurisdiction. It would have to be that you're calling for the area where you live. So at any rate, you can look up more information about 988. It did just start, I believe it was this year, July, or maybe it was last year, but it's fairly new and a lot of people don't know about it. 988 instead of 911. And ultimately, in line with NAMI's campaign, help, not handcuffs. So you can call 988. You can also text NAMI, NAMI, to 741-741 for immediate assistance. And again, for yourself, if you want to talk to someone confidentially 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you can contact these numbers, the 741-741, to be able to speak with someone directly about whatever you may be dealing with yourself until you're able to connect with a mental health professional that you can talk to in person, like a counselor, some trained professional. So just wanted to share those resources with you all because, again, some things may sound like they're cliche, but they are real in terms of applying them to your lives. And especially if you are helping someone, you are a caregiver of someone who lives with severe mental illness. So, Dr. Fletcher, you mentioned that you have 4 children.
Yes.
You're one of 8 children.
Yes.
With your family and having that kind of internal system of support with your own children, how were you able to share your life experience in an effort that they may be also able to help? For example, if uh, it's a visit with grandma, because again, she's your mother, and maybe that role wasn't filled there. And then as children grow up and they learn who their grandparents are, and again seeing those images of what a grandparent is supposed to be, did you have any specific conversation with them, or how did you introduce your children to their life as a child of having a loved one with severe mental illness?
My children have seen me work in the field with people with developmental disabilities and mental health, so they understood why,
Mm,
especially when they had to deal with either their aunt or my mom, their grandmother. They understood. They were like, okay,
okay.
we get it.
Mhm.
Because I've always worked in this field. My kids have always been around it. My oldest daughter is a doctor. She is a child psychologist. My youngest daughter, also deals with people who have dual diagnosis. But all of my kids are compassionate,
Mhm.
and they all are realistic about mental health and what all comes with it. And I think that's one of those hidden blessings of having kids that are compassionate, because they've seen it, they know it, they've dealt with it. Probably more than they wanted to growing up, because I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure I was always over involved in my work with serving. But my kids they're very compassionate, and they're very understanding of people with disabilities.
So for people who want to go into this line of work, what are your top three recommendations for them?
I definitely, there's so many organizations that you can volunteer for or help support, to see if it's something you really will like doing.
Hmm.
Whether it's the local school systems who have students with developmental disabilities. And then we've seen since COVID a lot of students who are struggling with mental health issues as well.
Hmm.
Or if it's local agencies who support people with both developmental disabilities and mental health. It's lots of different areas where you can reach out and see if this is who you are and this is what you want to do. I've always known it's who I am and what I want to do, and as my kids started doing it or going into the fields, I was like, okay, great. So
Hmm.
I think it's really whatever your passion is. You really have to be passionate about serving to help people, in this field, because you're gonna see a lot and go through a lot for sure.
Yeah. Well, I truly appreciate this conversation with you today. And I hope that it's been helpful for those who decided to tune in and listen and learn, because that's ultimately the goal, for people to listen and learn about resources that are available. And if it's not applicable in their own lives, to be able to share this information with others in their communities, in their work settings, or friends that they know who may need these resources. So it has been an absolute pleasure talking to you again and seeing your face other than your pictures. I look forward to meeting you in person. Do you have any questions of me?
No, thank you so much for the 988. I learn something new every day. I'm happy to see that resource is out there. And that's
Mhm.
something I'm going to spread myself around to people and say, hey, here's this another resource we can use. So,
Yeah,
so grateful for what you do. Think you're amazing. Of course, I'm a
thank
fan.
you.
So I look forward to hearing your other mental wellness Wednesdays. And I hope you have a great evening.
Thank you. And I just want to share, we do have a comment from Portia Booker who says that Dr. Fletcher is speaking so much truth about the stigma that is placed from agencies on individuals. So that's real. And we may need to have a mental wealth Wednesday about that, so we can talk about some of the issues that families face when trying to deal and connect and partner, collaborate with local organizations, because it's not always smooth and easy, but at the same time it can be, and even more helpful than trying to do it alone. So you have to find some kind of way to be able to work together with the common goal of helping that person who is living with the symptoms. So just to close out with some resources, again, we talked about NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI.org. You can also go to mentalhealthamerica.org for more information. And I encourage you to download my mental health guide that is full of information about podcasts, books, movies, TV shows, Instagram accounts, and services, organizations, all mental health related. And that's at CoreyEmpowers.com. You can click on the mental health guide and have that emailed to you. So for now, goodbye. Thank you again, Dr. Fletcher, and thank you to all who joined in. May you all have a blessed and prosperous new year. Have a good night.
Have a good noon. Bye-bye.